thank you for your time, and just wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and your background to the community.
Thank you, Tomas. So yes, my name is Edith Deleon Guerrero, and my mother is Grace Deleon Guerrero Segla. She's also known as Ata Guerrero or Grace Guerrero. And I also come from a family of, people that serve the community. My uncle Larry, Lorenzo I. Deleon Guerrero, former governor. Larry Guerrero is also my mom's brother, so that is my family.
We're here to chat about your bid for re-election.
Yes.
And so we'll just start there. Why did you decide to run again and for this seat again?
Well, Tomas, first of all, thank you for reaching out to me and giving me the opportunity again to sit down with you and to discuss the reasons why I'm seeking re-election and why this particular office again. And so, as you see, a while back, it was between the U.S. delegate seat or returning back to the Senate. And so I did some soul searching. Of course, there's family. My mother herself is 79 years old, and I'm thinking, it would be very selfish for me to pursue the delegate seat, considering that my mom is of that age already, and I'm also taking care of her. And I want to make sure that, for whatever reasons, for the amount of time that she has here remaining, that I'm here should anything happen. So I couldn't find myself to leave my mother behind, basically. And so that's the reason why I forgo the desire to pursue the U.S. delegate seat. I decided to just stay back and seek re-election for the Senate, for the 3rd Senatorial District. Yeah.
And you left the Democratic Party. We've interviewed you and we've done a story on why. You're now an independent. There is some talk, though, that you might actually run under the Republican Party. Do you want to address those rumors? Are you staying as an independent?
I hear, right. I'm staying independent, obviously. In fact, just 2 days ago, I filed my letter of intent with the Election Commission to run as an independent. I submitted not my paperwork yet, but just my letter of intent that I will be running under the 3rd Senatorial District as a senator, as an independent. So, yes, there's a lot of talk like that, and and that's normal. It's politics. I guess people are interested in knowing what exactly I'm doing or which party am I going to go into, and I left one party. But I've come out, in prior interviews that I am running independent.
And when you look back at your term, what would you say has been some of your biggest success? What are your accomplishments in this past term?
I've never changed my focus, and that's primarily transparency and accountability. I've always been raising the issues of financial concerns of our government and all the issues that we are facing with respect to finding the funds to support the necessary obligations that we have under our government currently. And I've never moved away from that, because I truly feel that if we have our financial house in order, and we are clear and transparent to the people, and we are accountable by coming out and always talking about it and letting them know that this is what's happening and this is where we're at. That's very important for us to move forward to try and resolve a lot of these financial issues that we are facing. And the majority of that too is we are a tourism economy. And as we know, that our numbers are not even close to where we were before the pandemic. We're not close to that number, and as you can see, there's a lot of vacant businesses that are up for rent. There's closures that are happening before our eyes. Hyatt just left, an airline just went, and again, we depend on that revenue to support our economy, and that's the reason why all of this conversation of the financial situation of the Commonwealth government for our people, for our sustainability, is very important.
And of course, that's also in line with a lot of the public records requests you've been submitting. In your words, you want to verify the numbers.
Absolutely, and I'll share some data with you. As we speak right now, we are addressing the FY25 budget. We are holding a ceiling of 158 point some million for the appropriation, and we have not taken down the required obligations that we have to take down from that amount of money. But there are particular programs that are also not funded, and it's not addressed under FY25 budget. In particular, we have a balloon payment that's coming up next year in August of about $19.8 million. We're short of that money. We got $10 million utilities for the CNMI government. That is not included in the FY25 budget. You have $5.7 million for the Health Network Program, which is the medical referral. That is not included in the budget. Then you have $13 million, which is a 25% for the retirees. And speaking of that, if you remember, there was a letter that was sent to Joyce Tang by the governor that the $5.2 million that we took from the CEDA dividends is only good up to August of this year. And so that makes you think that you have a 1 month remainder of the current FY24 budget. Where are we going to find that money to keep that annuity paid out? And then you have 12 months out for the incoming FY25 budget of $13 million that we need to keep the annuitants whole. That's a big issue. And then you have $8.7 million that is not identified as funded under the FY25 budget for the group health and life insurance. That's for both the retirees and the active employees. So the overall underfunding is $57.2 million for FY25 for all of these programs. We have to be concerned. Like I said, we are a tourism-based economy, and the numbers are not there. There's a push to come at least at a comfort level by the HANMI and chamber organizations, which I support, to bring us up to at least 500,000 of visitors on an annual basis as a start, just so that we could sustain ourselves and stay afloat and prevent further closures of major businesses.
And Senator, as the incumbent, I did want to ask you about some criticism I've heard of your, I guess your search for the funds. People say that you're providing false hope. Some people have told me that it's false hope, that, there's more money out there than what they're presenting. How would you respond to that type of criticism?
I wouldn't, again, people are at liberty to say how they feel. But again, we go back to the issue of transparency and accountability. And the biggest funding that we received during the pandemic period was the ARPA money. And we need to know, again, we have to look at the books of the Commonwealth. When you move money around, there's always going to be, at a certain time period, what is the balance of that book. And those are all validations that needs to be done. And then if they're there, then what are the obligations, if there's any, against those funds that may be available at that time period. That's purely accounting. That's financial management. You could say, we don't have this money today, but you tell us why you don't have that money today. Are there any obligations booked against that funding? Or are you expecting other obligations to come in later time period to go against that funding? And so that is the reason why it is very important that we look at it financially in that perspective. It's like managing your balance, right? You have to reconcile your account. You may write out a check today of $100, but you only have $50 in your account. So you are already negative 50. But that check of $100 will go out there in the market and float itself until it gets back into your bank account to draw that money down. By that time period comes back, you probably already made a deposit of $200. So you have a positive of what? $150. That's the point.
All right, thank you. And I did want to ask you about specific legislation. What legislation have you passed in your term?
I became a senator. This is my 4th year now, so I do have 2 actually Senate bills that I introduced that became public law, and that's Public Law 2310 and Public Law 22-27. Yeah, so those are 2 particular legislations that became law, and I've introduced numerous others that are either vetting through committees right now or in the other house that are being looked at. And I introduced several resolutions. One prime example is the 902 consultation, which is organized by the governor already locally, and then now we're just waiting for the U.S. president to organize his team as well. And then the other resolution, of course, that I introduced is to urge the administration to go out and collect the 20-some million of underreporting of the NAP BGRT taxes. That's another resolution that I introduced, and numerous others.
I want to talk about other legislation, particularly those originating in the House. I know this has been reported on frequently, but I wanted to discuss it here in this forum in the context of your campaign about, the phrase is it's sitting in the Senate. A lot of the bills are sitting in the Senate. I know at the Chamber you also outlined those bills that are in committee. So can you just explain to the constituents, the voters, what your approach is as Senate President to getting bills through?
Sure. Let's look at it this way. When both houses are organized after elections, both bodies, the presiding officers would create their standing committees for their particular house. And so the House have their own standing committees, the Senate also have their own standing committees. And each standing committee will be appointed by the presiding officer, which is in my situation, the Senate President appoints under the leadership who will be chairing particular standing committees at the request or desire of the leadership membership. And so that's how the process goes. And then with respect to legislation, let's backtrack a little bit. If we are creating these committees and we are drafting legislation and we are passing them at first and final reading, we have to think about why is it that we are creating committees? The intent of the committees is to do the work, to work through the process of that legislation, to seek public comments, to make analyses, to study the legislation, whether it's good for the people, whether it's good for the Commonwealth, and if there's any other issues that needs to be addressed and corrected and fixed. If we're not going to be looking at legislations in that right way of doing things, then we will be passing legislations at first and final reading, which is really not the way to do work up at the legislature. I've seen numerous bills will be passed at first and final reading. Work has not been thoroughly done, and it goes up to the Senate, for example, and now we do the due diligence of this particular legislation. We have to work that way. And not only that, Thomas, in every house, we talk about funding. When you have the leadership organization, you also have leadership money that goes into each committee. And so we must, as the public, we must look at that also to make sure that the funds that are being received by each particular standing committee is well spent, that really the work is being done, that it's not just money funneling through the standing committee and work is not going to be done. Then what is the purpose of us creating a committee, a standing committee, and appointing chairs of committees if the work is not going to be done? And just bills to pile up for nothing. That's not being responsible.
I want to talk about the potential next 4 years. If you are reelected, what would you like to get done that you didn't or couldn't get done in your first term?
There's a lot of issues that requires time to be addressed, and all of them require funding. And I remember, and I still have it before me, employment opportunities for our people. We have got to go beyond the system of you have to have the right name attached to you in order for you to have that employment opportunity. We really need to shift that practice here in the Commonwealth, because a lot of our citizens are looking for that opportunity. And so I'm a believer of, if you have the capacity and the ability to do the work, employment opportunities should be opened up and let it become very competitive, for example. The other area is, I do know that there's a lot of outstanding land compensation that remains unpaid that requires funding. It takes us back to the health of our economy and how can we address these pending land compensation cases that families have gone, but heirs remain alive today and they're still trying to seek remedy and resolution to their outstanding payments, which the government has taken and using it for public purpose, but the families remain waiting for their compensation. We as a government, we need to address that. And that's the reason why funding is necessary. We need to make our economy healthy in order for us to address all of these obligations that we need to pay out. A well-managed and sound development of our precious islands. I introduced a Senate bill, for example, on land reclamation, and I am focused on the quarry. There's a lot of dormant quarries here in the Commonwealth that are open pits, and I truly believe that we as a government, we need to find a way to reclaim those properties back, because we could reclaim that real estate and turn it into something that could produce revenue for today and into the future. You know, there's a article that I read, and it says it's no longer a hole in the ground, whereas other countries would build condos within the pit or turn it into a nice botanical garden, for example, for the tourists to visit. And so we need to explore those opportunities, and so that's one legislation that is still pending right now in one of the Senate committees. The other one, retirement fund for our retirees. I mentioned about the need to find the $13 million every year to keep that 25% whole within the 75% together and make it 100%. The settlement fund is only required to pay 75%, but the CNMI government, through our Constitution, is mandated to keep it whole. And that's the reason why it's always working to find the money to fork out the $13 million. This last one that we got, we took the CETA dividends to pay in whatever payroll that the 5.2 can pay out for the retirees' pension. Now we're short, we're going to run into 1 month short before the end of the fiscal year, and then another 13 for FY25. The other issue that we are facing with the retirees is a lot of them are facing collections from the settlement fund on overpayments. Just before I came to see you, a retiree delivered her letter to my office, which is an offering of a settlement from the settlement fund after they reviewed her ability to look at her expenses and what is she able to pay back. But even with that amount of money on what is she being offered to settle on, it has greatly reduced her collection amount down 20%. But if, by looking at the calculation of the gross pay on the 75%, it's still a huge chunk of money that you're going to take down, that they're framing it into an installment payment for about almost 4 years. And then you have a last payment out. And the 25% is not included in that formula. Because why? The central government is the one that's funding the 25%. And if it doesn't have the money to fund, then you're talking about only 75% of this particular retiree, less the installment payment if she agrees to settle on that amount, which is very substantial because a lot of them have already, they're getting sick. After 10, 13 years of living on this income, all of a sudden the system who created the error is now going after these retirees and stressing them out. And they're worried. And they having, gone into other obligations to keep the family afloat. And you have this huge amount of money that's hovering over each person that is, trying to be collected on. And that's a serious concern. And so I introduced legislation also on that to address the issue. And that particular Senate bill is down at the House right now. CUC, power, the cost of electricity is not affordable at all. And that has to be looked into seriously with respect to the commodity that is coming into the Commonwealth and the pricing of that commodity at a certain time period when it was purchased. And how is the fact being calculated that it became effective? For example, in the clause, it goes up or down, I believe 4.5% or 4.9%, something to that effect. But even with that, the bigger question is, when that particular commodity was purchased back then, that huge volume of fuel that came in, for example, what was the price at that time period when that contract was executed out in the market? And did that pricing of that commodity stay at that price when the fact was calculated, up or down? Or did it go and move forward at the expense of the consumer? That particular work has to be done. And it takes a lot of work to go back and measure that commodity pricing during all those time periods when the fact became effectuated. That's a serious work in itself. I have done an oversight when I first became a senator. I believe my second year of being a senator, I did conduct an oversight with CUC. And I did ask the question about the contract for the fuel purchase. And I'll be very honest, to this day, I still can't get my hands on that fuel purchase contract. Because why I'm interested, I wanted to see for myself, where is the pricing of this particular commodity at, and when was it purchased, how is that purchase price affecting the consumer at the time period of purchase, and all the subsequent years when the fact became effectuated moving forward. Because I truly feel that somewhere in that contract, those purchases within the time period could benefit the customers, and it just requires dedication and time to look at those numbers and study it carefully and analyze it. And me not having my hands on the contract tells me something, that perhaps maybe someone's don't want me to see certain numbers because I am asking the right questions. But it's not a dead issue for me, at least in the interest of our people. I will still pursue it in some way.
I did also want to ask you, a lot of people are curious to see where proposed tax hikes will go. What's your view on taxes? And
let's look at our economy today. Yes, there's several bills that have been introduced to increase taxes. And so let's ask the question of, where do we stand today financially? I just laid out how much is underfunded. $57.2 million is not identified in FY25 budget. Our tourist numbers are down. We're not collecting the revenue as we used to in terms of the number of tourists that are coming in with the airlines. And so you have these tax bills on an economy that is not there in prior years before. And so the question would be, why weren't these tax bills introduced, right, when the economy was good? And when the economy is tanking, you reverse it out. You have to go with the way the economy is going.
So you don't support that?
Because, well, let's look at it this way. If you impose taxes, the price of goods and services will go up. Businesses may not necessarily stay open. And if they do, who do they pass that cost to? Us, the consumers. And then the spending power of people will go down. Because, again, the prices of goods and services will go up in the market. And there's also no opportunity for families to save money because everything is going to go up as a result of tax increase. There's one legislation to do construction tax, to increase taxes on those that are doing construction projects. If you analyze that carefully right now, by the way, all of those bills are still in the Senate Fiscal Affairs Committee being looked at, being analyzed. But let's use that particular sector as an example. You have the money that is given out to contractors to do construction projects. So you have the main contractor. You want to tax that contractor based on that money, but you also want to tax on the BGRT. And then from the same money, for example, that contractor may subcontract another contractor to do part of the project of the main contractor, but that's the same money. And so you already taxed this once. It goes down to the subcontractor. Now you're taxing the same money twice. And then it flows down to the next. Now you're going to tax it the third time. So all of these have to be carefully looked at, whether is it fair for the business, because on the flip side, again, the risk would be, would they stay in business, or are we going to hurt them when we are already generating the BGRT on a monthly basis where they have to file their taxes? So again, when you do legislation, we go back to the original conversation of first and final reading. We want to push forward through just because we are urgently needing to generate revenues. But when it gets to the point of analyzing the impact, the pros and the cons of the legislation, what's going to happen? Is it sound to impose at the current market conditions of the CNMI? Or would you rather stay within the same schedule of taxes, and they're doing all the projects, for example, and they're generating all that revenue for their companies after their expenses, but they're still going to pay their BGRT? And so you have to study that. you don't just go on a first and final reading, both that house and this house, and let's go for it. You know, you have to really analyze things before you kick it off that way.
All right, Senator, thank you so much. We just have about 5 or 4 minutes left of the interview, so I did want to give you the chance just to have the open floor to address your constituents directly, why they should vote for you, anything else you'd like to share with the public.
Thank you, Tomas. You know, again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about being transparent and accountable to the people. When I chose to run initially, I said to myself, I will offer myself to the people. I don't take anything other than what I earn every 2 weeks since serving the people in the Commonwealth. I don't take down any monthly allowance, which is money taken down that is not taxable, besides the salary being earned by elected officials. I don't drive around with publicly funded transportation. I pay my own. I use my own money for my own gasoline, my own telephone. And I think why I share that is because that is very important. When everything else is being looked at financially and the suffering is right before our eyes, and we know that the budget is not there for us to fund everything else that we are obligated to fund, when people are losing their jobs or facing reduction of hours for work, but then you have all the other luxuries of another branch of government that is taking this down, that are not being transparent about. To me, that is unfair for the citizens out there that are trying to pick and choose who would be best to represent them, who would be best to represent their interests and their care, and how can they get a better life. That is, to me, very important that the people should know about. And I mentioned about leadership account. There's other accounts that as elected officials we get funded. For example, we are members of a delegation, and so we also get that extra funding. But it's how do elected officials spend those kind of monies that are not being reported out to the public? That is very important. Besides our salary, which is, we are paying taxes on that. But what about the other, I call them passive income accounts, that are not being seen by the public, but yet we face all of these dilemmas financially, and we're not talking about those things transparently and being accountable. I think that's very important.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.